Well, I can get started here with the welcome. I think most people are starting to log on now. But my name is Jennifer Skay and welcome. I'm the District Director for Prairie Communicators, the Southwest chapter of the North Dakota Professional Communicators Group. And we do have a couple new members. I'm not sure if both of them are able to join us today or not, but Cameron Hellman from the North Dakota Office of Management and Budget, and Elizabeth Nesham from North Dakota Stockmen's Association. So if those two are on today, welcome. And also welcome all of our extended North Dakota Professional Communicators family to this statewide virtual event. This is our Southwest offering to the group. Do we have any guests at all that are joining us for the very first time through North Dakota Professional Communicators? If so, feel free to take yourself off of mute and give a little introduction for ourselves.
This is my first time. My name is Tara Firkenhoff, and I do marketing at North Dakota State University.
Welcome. We're glad to have you join us today. I just like to remind the group that the state conference is scheduled for April 17th and 18th at the Radisson Blu in Fargo. And there are only 4 more days to register at the early bird rate of just $99 for members. It is $129 for guests. And the state membership dues for NDPC is only $35 a year. And it includes access to all the state meetings. This is considered a state meeting, and the national membership is $110. It includes the ability to enter contests, a national conference registration discount, and many other perks. We have a new email address here at Prairie Communicators. It's prairiecom with 2 M's, nd@gmail.com. So feel free to shoot the group an email if you have any questions about membership or anything else. And lastly, we have a scholarship opportunity. We have $500 available for a scholarship. And if you know anybody who is going into communications, any students that are going back to get their communications degree, please send them to aboutndpc.org/students. And there's the spring application deadline for that scholarship is March 31st. And again, that's the Marion Piper Memorial Scholarship. So encourage anyone you know that is going into communications to go ahead and give that application a shot. And last but not least, I'll have Marty Dahl introduce our guest today.
Yeah, thank you, Jen. So I'm very happy to introduce you to Paul Omodt. Paul is the owner and founder of Omodt Associates, and he's here today to talk about the importance and craft of reputation management, both during and outside of times of crisis. I've had the opportunity to work with Paul in the past, and actually working with him on a project currently with Woodbury and the building of their new water treatment plant and the things they are dealing with PFAS. So Paul founded Omodt Associates based in Minnesota in 2013. He's a 25-year Minnesota public relations and communications veteran and is known for handling some of the Midwest's biggest crisis and critical communication situations, including just recently being embedded with the city of Burnsville during their recent killing of the 3 first responders. He's a nationally recognized communications professional, and his expertise is sought by a broad mix of clients, from corporations to small businesses to governments and nonprofits. And his blend of practical experience, storytelling, and engaging speaking style also makes him a conference favorite as a speaker. So we're happy to have him here, and I'll turn it over to you, Paul.
Very good. Thanks, Marty. Thanks, everyone, for joining me today. I also like to come to a new audience. Although Marty and I have worked together, it looks like a lot of new faces, or at least new names up there. Also exciting to talk to a new group. I want to make this kind of a conversation rather than a presentation. So I want to make this dialogic, not monologic. So the more you guys shout at me and yell at me and throw questions at me, the better. And I want to start with a little exercise here. And I encourage you guys to open up your chat. I'm going to ask you to do this for me. I want you to think about your hometown. the town where you grew up and kind of your roots were kind of sprung and what you think about that hometown. So here's what I want you to do to put in the chat is take your hometown, name it out, and then give me 3 words, phrases, or images that are related to your hometown when you think of your hometown. So whatever it may be, give me the idea of what your hometown is and tell me 3 words, phrases, or images that relate to it when you think of your hometown. And I'll give you a minute or two to do that. I'm seeing some great stuff come in, and some of these I'll have to have someone explain to me because they look super, super exciting and kind of confusing. So first, let's go with that. Where did barbells go? What did that one say? Small town, farmland, rural. I can understand that. That's easy, right? I see sugar beets, flood, and airbase. That makes sense to me. Larimore, Kaylee, you're gonna have to help explain to me what polar bear, wheat, and GFAB is. If we could do that, that'd be helpful. If you want to give me what that is.
So we are home of the polar bears in Larimore. So when you enter Larimore, there's actually a statue of a polar bear that greets you. So I always think about that. Wheat, just we're a farming community. So that's a big part of the culture there. And Grand Forks Air Force Base. We have a lot of folks who work at the Air Force Base who actually call Larimore home. So those are the 3 that came to mind.
Very nice. And I see lots of references to cattle and farming and agriculture. Unfortunately, as a Gopher hockey fan, I see lots of reference to UND. That's okay. We can argue about that over beers later someday, maybe at the conference coming up. And I see a lot of things that kind of sink into your mind when you think of that, right? And so typically when we talk about reputation, those are the things that become embedded in you as a primary audience, internal audience member. Now I want you to do the same thing, but I want you to turn your sights on me. I was born and raised in Minneapolis. And I want you to put out the word Minneapolis and give me 3 words or phrases when you think of Minneapolis, what you think of. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about where I'm from, where I grew up, where my roots are from, and give me 3 words or phrases when you think of the city of Minneapolis, what do you think of? I'm seeing lots of stuff coming in, very interesting stuff. I'm seeing music. I'm seeing sports. I'm seeing the Mall of America. I'm seeing George Floyd, of course. I've seen Walker Arts, the Vikings, music, shopping, sports, Prince, of course, right? All these types of things come in and become kind of the reputation of Minneapolis. And the Minneapolis has a very interesting kind of context to it and why Minneapolis became what it did. And like many of the cities you represented, your hometowns, Minneapolis actually founded on agriculture and the fact that there was a waterfalls there and they could bring the trains there to mill all the grain. So Minneapolis grew up, right, at where the rivers came together, whereas the waterfalls, and out of that came something kind of interesting and different. So when we see what came out of Minneapolis, not only do we see agriculture as a part of it in business, but because they had to advertise the wheat, Minneapolis became the hub for kind of the creative class. And we see that in terms of advertising agencies that are based here, public relations agencies that are based here, and kind of became world renowned because of what it offered. And the creative class started to demand things such as the Guthrie Theater, such as music. And we became kind of known for that. And those things became woven into the city, as did the natural features of Minneapolis, which is lots of lakes, lots of rivers, right? Lots of outdoor space. And I liken it this way. I grew up in Minneapolis, and I'm proud to say I did, because when the Minneapolis I grew up in, you were never more than 10 minutes away from a lake, a river, something to go play in, to go bike around. You're never more than 10, 15 minutes to an arts venue where you could go to see a theater. Fun fact, my sister went to high school with Prince. Their pictures are side by side in the yearbook because my last name is Omodt and theirs was Nelson. So N and O were right next to each other. Kind of a fun thing. The coolest guy on the planet next to the dorkiest person I've ever met, my sister, side by side in a yearbook. But Minneapolis became this cultural hub because of that, right? Minneapolis was a city of lakes. And it was a city that was relatively well tended, in the 19th century, the 1900s, 1910, all the way. And then things started to change, right? When I was growing up, Minneapolis started to have very robust high schools. In the 80s, that all changed. And the reputation of Minneapolis began to change in the 80s. We went from having 12 highly competitive public high schools to 6. And what was happening was everybody was moving out to the suburbs. And everything started to shift and change. And the character of Minneapolis started to change just a little bit. And it led to certain things that we started to see in the 80s and 90s. And we started to say, hey, we've got to watch for this. And one of the responses to this in terms of reputation was what we called minding the gap. We're seeing a gap between people that didn't exist before. So in the late 90s, the creative class in Minneapolis and the business class in Minneapolis got together and we created the Mind the Gap campaign. The Mind the Gap campaign started to say, we are seeing changes and shifts demographically, economically, education-wise, that is not going to be pretty in our city. And if we don't mind the gap, we're going to have a problem. Which gets me to kind of why reputation becomes so important and why some of you related to 3 words or phrases, George Floyd. And in my way of thinking, George Floyd was the outcome of us not minding the gap and seeing the things that started to break down what our city was and how people think of it differently now than they did 20 years before, because we didn't kind of pay attention to that. So I'd like to share this quote with people, and it's from Abraham Lincoln. And he said, character is like a tree and reputation is like its shadow. The shadow is what we think of it, and the tree is the real thing. The way I think about that is that the tree is the real thing. The tree is the city. The shadow is the reputation of the city. And if you don't tend to the tree, the core thing of it, that shadow becomes distorted and you don't see the real thing. The reputation goes away. And how important is reputation, and how much can we as communicators shape a reputation of an organization or a city? Think about it this way. If you look at a public company, between 20 and 40%, given on the type of company it is, of its value of a public company, publicly traded company, is in its reputation. Does it have good leadership? Does it sell good products? Does it operate effectively? It's all reputation based. It's not the multiples of the income and things like that. It's what people believe it will do in the future. We see what's happened to Boeing recently in terms of its value loss and its reputation because they haven't tended to what I call the tree of the organization. They're not paying attention to quality. They're not paying attention to the airframes, right? You see doors flying off. You see 737s, the new MAX, 2 of them crashed within 6 months, 2 years ago. And you see in Boeing's reputation going away slowly and slowly because they haven't tended to the tree. So we have to start considering, what is our reputation? And as a communicator, what are we really doing? So my friend Fred Garcia defines reputation as this. Reputation is equal to the sum of all the images in our head that we have of that person, place, or thing that has a reputation. We earn that reputation, it sticks in our mind, and it's by 3 components. He says it's by the performance, how we perform, it's by our behaviors and values, and then it's about how we communicate those 3 things. So when I work with clients on building reputation, I work on what I call a 3x3 system of reputation. I try to figure out, if I'm going to create something, I'm not a communicator, I'm no longer a communicator, I'm a weaver. I have to weave together 3 threads that go down and 3 threads that go across. And in doing so, and tending to each of those threads, we build something that is a reputation that is strong and vital. It will help us grow and see things differently. So what does that look like? What does a 3x3 kind of reputation grid looks like? So if you can imagine this, think about this. Think about the three things that Fred say makes up reputation. It's what you do, it's your performance, it's how you behave, it's your values, and it's how you communicate that. So if you put those across, if you think those things, it's what you do, how you do it, and what you say about it. Because you are a shaper of your communications and your reputation. And what I'm going to encourage everyone in this room to be is also a co-creator of that, and see yourself as a communicator, not as a monolithic or monologue, but as a dialectic or dialogic communicator, where you are looking to have a two-way conversation with all your audiences and be co-creators of your reputation. So let me kind of pull that apart for you just a little bit more and show you how this kind of works. I got a call about 6-7 years ago from actually a school in South Dakota. And the head of the school called me and he said, Paul, we have a CNN problem. CNN came out and did a negative story on our school. We weren't prepared for it. We didn't know how to handle it. Our school serves 200 students a year. We serve only Native American children. And they came and they looked at our fundraising and they said, this is a bad fundraising, this is a bad school, and we really got slimed. And you can go find that story on CNN, you can find it on their Wikipedia page. And he said, so what do we do about CNN? And my response to him was, you don't have a CNN problem. Rather, what you have is an issue with your tree that might need to be fixed, your core, because maybe your fundraising issue is something that needs to be addressed. We can fix the reputation and we can weave you a better reputation. But we have to fix the core. We got to fix the tree, not the shadow, not the things that people are saying about the tree. And he took that to heart and he said, so what would you do? And so I drove to the middle of South Dakota and I gave him an assessment. And as I'm giving him the assessment, he said, will you come and give this to our board of directors? What you would do and how you see the world. And so I get called into the board meeting of this school. And I'm midway through my presentation and they said, hey, son, stop. We're gonna need you to stop right now and step out of the room. And I thought, oh my goodness, I've insulted people. I've said something wrong. I didn't translate my Minneapolis into South Dakota very well. And I went and stood out in the hallway and I felt like, oh my goodness, what have I done? And about 5 minutes later, they called me back in. They said, please don't finish your presentation. Please just get started with building us the reputation that you told us that we need to build. Start weaving what we need to do. And can you start this right now? And I said, I would love to. I'd love to start weaving the reputation with you guys and fix the things that top of that queue. Let's make sure we define your values. Let's spell them out so everybody can see them. Let's make sure that we live by those values. And then let's talk about how we do those values. So those are the three threads that we started. Now, believe it or not, this goes back only 7 years. This school did not have a website, right? This school did not have modern communications. They put out a newsletter to parents on Facebook, and they put out a newsletter internally to tell people what was for lunch that week and things that were going on in the school, and that's about it. And so I knew I had a big job to do, and I knew I had to figure out my next three things that I weave into all my communications programs when you build a robust communications program. And that is building in the three ways that our brains work and take in information. So if we think about it this way, we know that there's three ways that people take in learning and information. The first way is by reading it. We have some people that are readers. The second way is the people that are oral learners, that they hear things. That's how they prefer to get their information. And the third way is kinetic. People like to do things, to see things, to feel things, to touch things. So all our communications became in those three modes. So as I'm weaving the reputation, I'm thinking about, okay, what are the things that I need to to write so people can read? How do those need to look? How do they need to look to all my different audiences so that I can start weaving through them together a way that fits that type of audiences in the way they prefer to take in information? Which meant that we started a newsletter for the school that went internal and external, that we started a website, its first website in history, that was lots of text, lots of photos, lots of things that you could sell broader than the campus. We started a podcast for our oral audience, people that wanted to listen in the car. In South Dakota, there's lots of road time, maybe just like in North Dakota. You might drive half an hour to work, you might drive 45 minutes to work. So we started a podcast that focused on about a 20-minute segment. We've got over 10,000 people that listen to our podcast in the last 7 years, more than the employees that we have. And that's grown and grown and grown as people have joined our podcast. And the third thing is that we had never invited people onto our campus to do kinetic exercises. In other words, they never knew what the school at the end of the block was, tucked away on the river, although it was the biggest employer in town. If you didn't work there, you really had no reason to go there. And we started to bring people on campus for tours, for the powwow, for school events, and open up our sports field so people could come and test drive us and see what we were about. So everything we did about weaving that thing and all our values that went through that, all our actions that went through that, and everything that we said was weaved through those types of systems of communication. At the bottom of our kind of weaving, we had to then kind of figure out who our audiences were. And this is where it got kind of interesting because we had an internal audience and an external audience. But we also had what I call the third audience. And I also think this is the one that gets the most attention, but is usually the one that is not usually considered till it's too late in terms of reputation management. And that's what I call the episodic audience. You have an internal audience, you have an external audience. We know what they are typically. Internal audience would be our employees, right? The employee families, our students, their families. They're tied in tight with the school. We have our external audience, which might be people that live in the town, regulators that come and look at the school, make sure we're running things okay, right? It might be the media. But the episodic audience is the one that comes to us only when there's good news or bad news to share. When we think about that, think about the things when you gave me your ideas of what Minneapolis was. Most of those things were episodic, things that you had experienced in that moment. You knew that Prince was from Minneapolis and you maybe saw him in concert. I see a lot of people said the Vikings, right? We saw things that you come and enjoy the city and you leave, it's episodic. The George Floyd thing, hopefully, was episodic. It happened, it's seared into your memory, right? But it became something that needs to be managed. And so when we look at building reputation, we want to make sure that we're thinking through our audiences, not just the ones that are stable and we can identify, but also the ones that are kind of test driving us when they come into our town once every whatever. I think of towns that host like Hayward, Wisconsin. Once a year, it hosts North America's largest cross-country ski race. Hayward, Wisconsin goes from a town of like 2,000 to a town of about 25,000 once a year. And what do people think in that episode when they come to that town? They have one weekend to put on their very best face to keep people thinking positive about that city, right? For the whole next year and whether they come back again and fill up all the hotels locally, all the bars, everything else that goes on with a race. It's an episodic thing that's well managed because it builds their reputation. So as we were working with the school, we start figuring out, okay, we want our people to be co-creators. We don't want monolithic communications. We want dialogic, which means it's two-way and both sides inform each other and have a conversation with each other. So how does that look? How do you do that with communications when you want to build out this reputation and this brand? Well, the first thing we did we did a survey of the community. So we knew what our baseline was. We knew exactly what the local community thought about us. And we did it in a 30-mile radius of where the school was. We figured that was the most people kind of paid attention to school because that's where most of our employees came from. Most of our students came from that same radius. And we did a reputation survey. On top of that, that was a formal way of doing it. We did man on the street surveys where we went out and actually asked people randomly. We did random intercepts to ask people what they thought of the school and what they knew about the school so we could kind of get a gauge of that in a less formal way. And the amazing thing that we found was that the biggest employer in that town and in that 30-mile radius, most people, the best thing they could say about it is my cousin works there. My brother works there. I think it serves Native American children, and that was about it. And so I asked them, what would you want to know about that school? How would you want to be a co-creator with me to understand that school? And people immediately said, I'd like to go to that school. We've never been invited into the school. That's easy enough. And again, that goes with the kinetics strategy. And the next thing they said was, you know what we'd really like? We'd like to spotlight these amazing teachers that you have at that school. And you get to thinking about that just a little bit. What does the staff do there? Who's an educator on that campus? There are 200 students, and yet there are 300 employees at that school. So it's not just teachers. We consider everybody that's on that campus a teacher because it's a residential school. It's in a residential setting. The children live in houses with, a group of 10 children and 2 house parents. So it's a very kind of labor intensive thing. And we started talking about that. What more would you like to see? And then we flipped that around and we started asking our employees, what stories would you like to tell so that you could share that story? And how would we engage you in doing that? And hence the podcast, half of our episodes feature our staff talking about the work they do, how they do it, what they do, and it's a two-way conversation. The other half is that we bring in experts that are broader than the school to help shape the image of the school and reputation by bringing in kind of more regionally or nationally known speakers, specifically ones that are Native American, specifically ones that are Catholic because the school has a Catholic basis to it. And our audience keeps growing and growing because we ask them, how would you want to be portrayed? So it becomes a two-way thing. And then the fun thing that we do is that we have identified our ambassadors, internal and external ambassadors. And every 6 weeks, we send out a one-page flyer to them electronically or on paper. And it's called These 3 Things. And we highlight 3 things about the school that you can talk about. And you think, how does that work? Well, we bring people on campus, we give them a tour, we show them around. So our external audience comes and becomes internal. And we tell them that we're going to deputize them and make them ambassadors for our school. Every 6 weeks, we'll give you 3 things to talk about if you so choose, so that you can talk kind of reliably about the school. And we do that same thing with our employees. Now, we've done this for the last 5 years. And then we go out and last summer, we did another survey of residents within 30 miles, and we gauged our reputation. What do people think about us? What do they think about us now that they can get information on the website anytime, right? That they can get information on our podcast at any time, and they can go talk to a friend or neighbor about us anytime and get something that's actually relatively new, and they've been invited on our campus. Our reputation score among our audience went up 30 points in 5 years. Now we have a reputation score on our scoring system that's in the 90 percentile. People that know us, like us, and they can repeat back to us, not just that's a school that serves Native American children. They can also tell us that all our kids get counseling services at it's a 6-to-1 ratio, that they have equine therapy on campus, that they have art therapy on campus, that there's a museum attached to the school. And they can go on and on and on and give you information about the school and why it's a better school for these children. And suddenly what we've done is we've created a two-way conversation between our community and its students and the population that it serves. And our reputation has gone up. The funnest thing is that when we go out and do the random intercept interviews now, and usually I'm the one that gets to go do that because I'm kind of an inside-outside source. I can walk down the street and talk to people and ask them the prompts, and they will start telling me with pride what they know about that school. And I can go to towns within 30 miles of that, and that same thing happens. Whereas before, I couldn't find that. So we are slowly, surely building the reputation of that school. And what's the value of a positive reputation? Well, here's what comes out of that positive reputation that we've weaved together. First off, our donations, we're 100% donor funded. We take no government money. Our donations have gone up every year. So our donations during the pandemic went up 30%, believe it or not. More people were engaged with our school. They felt better about our school. They saw the progress our school made. So your donations go up. The second thing is that in the battle for talent that most people are facing in towns across America, is that all our positions are filled. We've become recognized as the employer of choice within our employment area. And again, we are very conscious of what our employees bring to that and the reputation that we have built because of that. And thirdly, our school is completely full of kids who want to come to our school because you only get to come to our school by an application process. And our school is completely full once again after the pandemic. And so what's the value of the reputation? Well, it also comes from the fact that now we have people defending us on social media, which never happened before. We have people defending us on Wikipedia posts that never happened before. And we continue to grow in that feeling of what we deliver, but it's a very conscious rebuilding of a reputation that had been harmed. We fixed the problem with the fundraising because we had to fix the tree, not the shadow. And we keep kind of feeding that tree to build a stronger and stronger shadow. So where does this lead us with starting off with our hometowns? And what do we do with a city such as Minneapolis, which to me continues to have some great attributes, but I can tell you, objectively speaking, it also has, the gaps have been exposed. The George Floyd incident exposed those gaps. And we keep thinking, we keep pushing, our community leaders to say, what's the reputational plan for Minneapolis? And I have to tell you, as part of the kind of the creative class in Minneapolis, that we've mostly been disappointed in the response of the city to kind of manage itself in terms of reputation. And part of that is that I think the tree, the core, its council can't get along to save its life. It fights constantly with the mayor. Any initiative gets shot down. Their efforts at police reform kind of muddied the waters. And their most recent effort to do an advertising campaign to recruit police officers resulted in the fact that they got exposed as hiring a firm out of Ireland to do the recruitment campaign using stock footage from the city of Baltimore, and gave the city yet another black eye. All those things that you think about, did they really think about when they did that campaign, they were connecting in a two-way conversation as opposed to a one-way conversation, and think that they're going to recruit people to come to work for the city of Minneapolis? It's such a kind of alignment of any type of weaving. It becomes a straight line, not something that comes in together like it should. So when you think about the reputation of a place, we have to think about it from the internal and external, and whether we are actually equipping people to be our ambassadors and talk greatly about the city of Minneapolis. 2 weeks ago, that the mayor of Minneapolis gave a presentation to the downtown council of Minneapolis. And the biggest employer is, of course, Target downtown. They have about 12,000 employees. And on a given day, there's maybe 500 employees downtown that work for Target because 95% of them work remote. But Target was bringing back all their employees for a week-long meeting. And the mayor was exhorting them to say, if you don't come back downtown, you're a quote unquote loser. So he was calling people losers for not wanting to come downtown and stay downtown every day like the good old days. And I think about that quote over and over again, and I think about the way they've missed a line. They're kind of trying to fix things with the police department. And I wonder, do they really understand reputation? Do they really understand how to weave it back together? Do they really think about the ways that people like me should be talking about it to audiences and weaving it back and forth by feeding me the good news of Minneapolis as opposed to exposing me to the bad news that they continually just stumble upon? So my challenge to you guys as communicators is to think about what goes into reputation and how carefully we build it, how carefully we weave it together, and how carefully we make it not a one-way street, but a two-way street across 3 different channels. It's who we say we are. It's how we perform against that. It's how we talk about it. It's who we talk about it to, whether we manage the crisis aspect of it or not, and whether we make sure that the people that are part of that reputation have something good to say about it. And finally, it's about making sure the format fits the way people take in information today, which might mean that we do things differently. So often when I work with new clients, what I find out is that they have 1 or 2 main channels of communication, and they're missing 2/3 of their audiences. They're missing people who think differently, who take in information differently, and they never engage that audience. They don't engage the visual aspect. the oral listening aspect, or they don't understand the way to write to an audience that fits well. So taking care to learn all those things becomes part of our ability to weave a new reputation. I think about what happened in Burnsville on February 18th. For those that didn't know this, Burnsville is a client of mine. It's a place where Marty also worked at one point. And on February 18th, about 2 a.m, they had 2 police officers and a firefighter paramedic shot after a suspect holed up in a house, gave up negotiating with the officers, and just started shooting them and killed three of them. Instantly, Burnsville's reputation had the ability to change for the good or for the bad. And so they called us in that Sunday morning and they said, we're at a pivotal point in our city's history. How are we going to come out of this, and how are we going to look in the long run? Because this is an episodic thing that happened to us. And the good news is that they had hired me and some other consultants to come in about 2 years prior to start thinking about crisis communications, to think about the resiliency of their civic systems. And we're able to lean into those things pretty quickly and stand up emergency operations and a command center and all the things we needed to do to manage communications and build that brand out. And so for those that have seen what happened in Burnsville, if I could ask you to do this, if you saw anything on the news about it, if you read anything about it, could you put into the chat the 3 things that you recognize from the communications that came out of Burnsville in the last 2 weeks? So something episodic happened. It's a city, right, with a reputation, and put in the 3 things that you think happened in Burnsville. I'm seeing words come in: grieving, unity, coming together, strength. Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Tara. Community support, quick response. Thank you, Brenda. Strong support for first responders. So what I'm seeing is that thank you, Jennifer, tragedy, support, and strength. Exactly what we thought we needed to project, we were projecting in that moment. In that episode, we wanted to make sure that we had this kind of 2-way thing that we could build in the city of Burnsville quickly. And part of what we did is on day 1, we established a memorial site at City Hall. And I can tell you that on that Sunday morning, we all went through a period of grieving because we had just lost 3 colleagues. The 2 officers were people I'd known. They've been in some of the trainings I've held there. And you're going through this emotional phase of this, but immediately you're going to, what do we do? How do we serve the community? How do we serve our employees? How do we think about that internal audience, that external audience, and that episodic audience? And we immediately built those things to allow people to show their support, to show the resiliency of the community and the strength of the community. So day 1, we set up a memorial at City Hall. Day 1, we held a prayer vigil outside of City Hall with civic leaders, religious leaders, and said, yes, please come now, and we'll do this in a way that makes sense for our community. And we did that later, the next 3 days after that. And we got back on our feet, and we made sure the world knew that we were back on our feet and everything was running. We were very conscious of the reputation we're trying to build. We're very conscious of the reputation that we're trying to maintain. And we're very conscious of the one that we knew could put us crosswise, like we've seen other cities become crosswise, that become kind of second guessed on their crisis response, and that episodic kind of thing that builds our reputation. So it's something we really thought about is, are we weaving the right image for the city of Burnsville long term? And in my mind, I think we did a fairly decent job in the moment of figuring out and moving it forward. So let me leave you with this. When we build reputation, it is something that we can't take lightly. There's a lot more to it than I can explain in 45 minutes in the way that we typically do this. But what we're doing is really, we're weavers. We're weavers of the thread, and the thread goes 2 ways. We can never build a top-down or a bottom-down reputation. It has to be something where we engage people back and forth time and time again. We have to do it in a way that they understand it, that acknowledges them, and it makes them co-creators in our reputation. Bringing people on our campus to speak at a vigil, open public mic, there's a risk to that. But we want them to be co-creators in their grief. It's the same thing we do with our 3 points at the school. We want you to be a co-creator. We want to give you this opportunity to add on to that and become part of the reputation that we build. There's a risk to giving other people your reputation, but there's a huge upside to it as well. With that, I'll kind of wrap up because I know we're at about 40 minutes and we can get to questions and answers. Thank you everybody for your attention. Thank you for kind of throwing the stuff into the chat. I appreciate that. And I will open myself up to questions.
Feel free to bring yourselves off mute, folks, and ask Paul whatever questions
Oh
you
yeah,
have.
Carol, I see Carol's question, and Carol, that's a great question. So her question is about, in working with a residential school, did you run into the preconceived perceptions on Native American boarding schools, and how was that addressed? And that's actually when I got kicked out of their meeting, was that when I was presenting to the board, I said, not only do you have to kind of manage the core here, I've looked to the future a little bit, and I saw it was happening first in Canada, now in the US, with boarding school history and kind of bringing that back. Now, our school was founded in 1927, so it was after some of the boarding school stuff, but it was run like many of the boarding schools of the time. And I said, we're going to have kind of a coming together on the boarding school thing, and it's going to be bigger than we are. And so that's actually when I got kicked out of the meeting, and I was very forward thinking, I think, or kind of blunt about it, saying, if you don't have a plan to do this, if you haven't put the thought and the time into it, it's not the thing. It's something else that's going to be a black mark on you. It's not going to be something. So how do we tell the story the right way from your perspective? And so they did exactly that. And they formed a committee the next year called the PATH Committee, which is the Path Towards Truth and Healing, to examine that very issue. Now, I would tell you that, frankly, a lot of the stuff we've done on PATH has been great, but we've kind of been reluctant to pull the big trigger on it of kind of the last phase of it and kind of be much more open about it. And actually this summer, we're going to press forward with a plan to do that and actually come to more to grips with it. It's something they can't kind of put off anymore, but that's a great question, Carol. It's something we're working on very hard, and I hope this summer that they're finally at a spot to do something more than just the committee that we've worked on, the history that we put on the website, the conversations we've held. Last summer, Red Cloud School did something in South Dakota that went half right, half wrong. They did very open kind of proceeding on it. Some people really appreciated it. Other people thought it was the worst thing they could have done. And so it was half right, half wrong. I think you have to learn to live with a little bit of uncertainty going into that very topic. But that's a great question. That's the one I flagged to them, and I thought that's why they kicked me out, and instead that's why they hired me. I see Tara with a question here. Would you do anything differently with the response to the shootings in Burnsville? Yeah, there's a couple things that I wish we could have done better. One thing we learned really quickly is that Burnsville at the time had 1.5 people in the communications department. They had a full-time communications director and a part-time social media person. And the full-time communications director had been on maternity leave when this happened and just came back that week. So I'd been kind of filling in as a communications director for them for about 6 weeks while she was out on maternity leave. And one of the things we flagged was that this is for a city of 65,000 people, for as robust of offerings you have as a city, you don't have enough communicators. And so one thing we had to do right away is ask other people to come in and help us run our communications. So that morning, I started calling friends that do what I do, and we gathered 12 different people there, and we embedded 12 to 15 people every day for 18, 20 hours a day, helping get communications out. But we weren't prepared for that, and we didn't have enough internal kind of staff and strength to do that. The good news is that people were more than willing to come and help us out, but not having that kind of set up in advance was a mistake on our part. So we've seen that done wrong. We also had some issues with, again, we wanted that two-way dialogue with people. And this is kind of funny, but also kind of not funny. One of the things the community wanted to do was to bring out some statues of first responders that had been sitting in a storage shed for a long time, and they were bronze and they weighed about 600 pounds. And they wanted to bring them to the memorial site. And we said, yeah, great, that's part of this. It has to be whatever. But they brought them to the site and they weren't stable on the trailer. And you could push them over with one finger. And so we had to make the tough decision on whatever night that was, about 8 o'clock at night, that we've got to take those back and get them anchored because we don't want a secondary crisis where someone has a statue fall upon them. So that type of thing of being open to that dialogic thing of, you know, a very robust back and forth between you and the community, as opposed to you telling them how to grieve, that was a tough decision to make. And that upset a lot of people, that we had to put it back in storage for a day to go have it anchored properly. Because a lot of people said, well, people wouldn't, you know, touch the statues. And we're like, nah, if one falls over, it's a problem. So that is a tough balance to strike. And it took us a day to get it right, but we got it right. And that was a snafu for us, I think. I think there's other things that we learned too, that we tried to at the Burnsville lesson learn, was that we tried really hard not to make any of it political, in the fact that we didn't want politicians capitalizing on it one way, whatever the party was. And we did that fairly well, but I got to tell you, some of our politicians on our council, who we can't really control, went out and made statements that were not helpful. And again, you can't control an elected official, what they say and do. And I wish we could have exerted more control by just convincing them not to say the things that they did sometimes. But that's a tough thing. I think what we really have to focus on in Burnsville is how we move forward with this. And I think the community is moving forward with it pretty well. We were very formal about shutting down the memorial after 3 weeks, because that's the standard that they use in firefighters, with firefighters. If there's a fallen firefighter, they say more than 21 days kind of hurts your readiness going forward. And that's when the fire crews wanted to be back to work. And so that's when they wanted the memorial down and back to work that day. And that made a lot of sense to us, and that gave the community a rationale for it that was acceptable. And so we actually, with that memorial, we brought in a 3D camera so we could capture it all and recreate it visually. So we took a 3D model of the memorial site, which is really pretty cool. So we can kind of bring that out again as we need it, just the way people left it, with their imprint, where they put their flowers, where they put their patches, where they put their handwritten signs. So it's theirs. And we preserved it as is. And I think that was a pretty cool thing. I see a note here from Jennifer too, a comment that I think the memorial is a great idea. And you're right, people needed to do something, and we needed to channel the energy, the positive energy, in a way that was helpful. And I can tell you that it was almost a little overwhelming someday. We had more fundraisers than we could put on our website that people wanted to advertise for. And each of those officers and the paramedic firefighter that lost their lives, they had their houses paid off. They had their utilities paid for the next 10 years from donations. They have college or post-secondary education funds for the kids if they had kids. The city fully paid all their benefits to the surviving spouses. There were 2 of them, and health insurance till the time they're able to retire. So the outpouring of wanting people to help was amazing. And we had to channel it really fast. And it was almost overwhelming to deal with all the ways that people wanted to donate and give. But having a place to put flowers that was manageable and appropriate, that was a decision we made really early on. And Jennifer, I think you're right. It was a good decision. It was something we're very happy with. Other questions, comments, feedback? Oh, Brenda, good question. What specific things did you do to keep it from getting political? And let me just start this by saying I mean this partly tongue in cheek, but when someone from the government comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm from the government, I'm here to help," run away, okay? Because most times it means I'm here because I want to impose something upon you or I want to get something out of it. And I'll give kind of a sad example of this. On the day of the shooting, we did a vigil outside, and there were, I don't know, maybe 1,000 community members there. We asked that no politicians other than our city council was there, and our city council is on paper nonpartisan, although it's a very purple city. We have 2 reds, 2 blues, and 1 independent. So it's all kind of a purple political situation, and none of them wanted to be political, and so we didn't allow that. However, the governor showed up and insisted on speaking at our press event that day, and that was not well received, and we asked them not to, and they showed up and pushed to the podium anyways. And so in actuality, we kind of failed on that measure on that first day by them just really pushing through. And we had the BCA, which is the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, as a spokesperson for the state to kind of walk through the facts of the situation. We had our police chiefs speak, and that was supposed to be the end of it. And then the governor pushed to the front and started taking questions. And that put us in a very tough spot because we said we weren't going to do that, and that set the bad tone. And so I made the decision that I was going to let him take 3 questions, and then I was turning off the lights and the microphones in the room, and he'd have to deal with that on his own. And that's exactly what we did. And he was about 30 seconds from having the lights turned off on him. And we signaled to them that that was going to happen. And that was the last time we saw the governor. So that was the last of the politicians showing up and kind of grandstanding. It was unfortunate. You can feel a government person's need to feel like being part of it. We gave them a list of things that they could do. Actually, on day 1, too, the other thing we did is like, we gave people, here's 20 things that you can do, elected officials, here's 20 things that are acceptable and helpful to us. Speaking and kind of crashing our press conference was not on that list. So to keep it from getting political, we asked politicians to do very specific things, and we actually gave them a list. Here's the appropriate things that we'd like you to do. And you know what? When you gave them that list, that's what they did. And that made it much easier on us. But allowing them to just kind of freelance it was not helpful. That's a great question. Thanks, Brenda. Other questions? And Brenda from Moorhead, just as a side note, I helped you guys, helped your city up there with its loss campaign, that local option sales tax to rebuild the library and stuff. And so got to know your mayor fairly well and your community leaders there, which is a very engaged, Moorhead's a very engaged city, which is kind of cool. Thank you, Brenda. Yes, great project. I can't wait to see it when it's all done. My nephew lives up there with his wife and my 2, I guess it'd be my nephew's kids, whatever that makes me, as second cousins or whatever, are all there, which is pretty cool. If there's no more questions, I can turn it back to Jennifer to wrap up, but I appreciate your time. I appreciate the ability to present to this group. I look forward to seeing you guys at your conference in April as well. I believe I will be speaking up there in person. I also love in-person presentations. They're much more fun than Zooms. So thanks again for the ability to have a conversation with you today and a dialogue with you. Appreciate the opportunity that Marty and Jennifer and the team presented.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. I know I'm probably speaking for the group, but I just got a lot out of this conversation and really appreciate it so much. Is there a place, would you be able to give your website or some place where folks can reach out to you if they
Yeah,
have any kind of need?
The best way to find me, like, here's the funny thing. Most of my business is referral. And so I have a website, but I don't think I've updated it in like 5 years, which is really bad on me as a communicator. I tell people to find me on LinkedIn. It's the fastest way to get me, and I'm the most responsive on LinkedIn. And so you can just find me. It's Omodt, OMODT. It's pretty easy to find me. You'll find some stuff I've written on reputation management on my LinkedIn page too, about the aftermath in Minneapolis, what it looks like, what Minneapolis needs to do to heal as a city and things like that. So hit me up on LinkedIn. That's the best place to find me. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we are just really looking forward to seeing you at the state meet too, at the state gathering too. I think it's going to be fabulous, and looking forward to meeting so many of you in person that I haven't seen before yet. So thanks so much. Thanks for, have a great rest of the week, everybody. And like I said, reach out to Paul if you have questions. You can reach out to me or any of our group if you have questions. Again, our email is prairiecommnd@gmail.com. So have a great rest of the week. Enjoy the
Great.
weekend.
Thanks, everyone.